Welcome to the Aero Export Consultants podcast. I'm John Young, and this is The Point. It's 2026, and just as I predicted, the news is still China. This episode is going to be something of a follow-up on our previous episode, which should be of no surprise given the news that has come out in this past month. For those of you who missed the last episode, much of it was spent criticizing the recent U.S. government actions towards China in the trade realm. Specifically, I examined what I believe to be a weakening stance towards China in several key areas of export controls, including ill-advised concessions on the recently announced affiliates rule and the dangerous decision to allow the sale of NVIDIA H200 chips to China. In case it wasn't clear, I took time last podcast to explicitly state my position that these concessions to China were at best problematic and at worst extremely dangerous. My perspective is that China cannot be trusted as a fair player in trade and will not abide by any rule other than its own advancement, and by conceding territory through laxing of regulations and suspending controls, we empower our adversary at our own expense. Now, obviously, China is going to remain a common subject of discussion going forward for a variety of reasons, but the reason I'm already following up on the story 1 month later is because of the new rule recently published by the BIS that is directly tied to the previous episode and the sale of NVIDIA chips to China. On January 13th, the BIS announced its newly revised license review policy for semiconductors exported to China. This new review policy was specifically crafted for the sale of NVIDIA's H200 chips as part of President Trump's legal framework to match his policy promises of allowing the sale of these chips to certain Chinese end users. As the announcement states, the main thesis of this new rule is that the BIS will now review export license applications for the NVIDIA H200, AMD MI325X, and similar chips on a case-by-case basis, provided certain security requirements are met. Along with this announcement, BIS and related officials offered justifications for why they believe this decision to be a beneficial one to the United States. Quote, today's rule follows President Trump's December 8, 2025 announcement that the United States will allow the H200 and similar products to be shipped to approved customers in China to strengthen national security, end quote. And the second justification, quote, export controls should evolve with changes in technology while protecting national security. Permitting the sale of the H200 to China under controlled conditions will strengthen the American technology ecosystem. Now, in response to that, first, I struggle to see a believable way that this decision will in some way strengthen national security. Second, how is relaxing restrictions on semiconductor chips that perform at a higher level than their Chinese counterparts so that they can be sold to China an evolution of export controls? But as always, we can't simply look at what is said by the people putting out these regulations. We need to look at the regulations themselves, maybe some outside commentary as well, and come up with our own conclusions. So let's get started. Here's the given summary of the new final rule for this policy change. Quote, the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, is revising its license review policy for exports of certain semiconductors to China and Macau, changing it from a presumption of denial to a case-by-case review. The semiconductors covered by this rule are the NVIDIA H200 and its equivalents, as well as less advanced chips, provided that 1, the semiconductors are commercially available in the United States at the time of publication of this rule, and 2, the exporter certifies that there is sufficient supply of this product in the United States. Production of this product for exports to China will not divert global foundry capacity for similar or more advanced products for end users in the United States. The recipient has demonstrated sufficient security procedures, and the item undergoes independent third-party testing in the United States to verify its performance specifications. Let's take a look at some of these initial points. Changing from a presumption of denial to a case-by-case review isn't terrible in itself. Our review can still return a denial after all, but it indicates a shift in overall policy. No more are these exports assumed to be denied in China, now they have a chance. And it's clear from the language surrounding these trade talks at the highest level that there is an expectation that approvals will begin going forward. After all, the whole point of this policy change is to make allowances, to open up this venue of trade to China. So moving to a case-by-case review process is a significant change. Next, I want to take a look at the second set of requirements for this policy to be enacted. The certification of supply, that these transactions will not divert global capacity, that there are significant security procedures, and the U.S. third-party testing. Here's what the rule itself says about its requirements and how they will be enacted. As part of the licensing process, the rule says the applicant must certify that the items operate below the performance criteria included in this final rule and specify how many units of the items have been shipped in the United States at the time of license application. The applicant must certify that there is sufficient supply of the product in the United States such that the export of the product authorized by this license would not result in any delay in fulfilling any existing or new orders of any of its advanced node integrated circuits from customers in the United States for end use in the United States, taking into account normal lead times. that global foundry capacity that would otherwise be used to produce similar node or more advanced integrated circuits for end users in the United States will not be diverted to produce the commodities authorized by this license for exports to China. The applicant must certify that the aggregate shipments of the product to China and Macau will be no more than 50% of the total product shipped to customers for end use in the United States of that product. The applicant must certify that the transaction is not prohibited by end user use controls and controls for non-military end uses and end users. The applicant must certify that the ultimate consignee will employ rigorous know your customer procedures to screen and prevent unauthorized remote access to unauthorized parties. And the applicant must certify that prior to export from the United States, every shipment of advanced computing commodities will be reviewed by a qualified third-party testing lab to confirm the technical capabilities and functions of the AI commodities described in the exporter's license application. The applicant must also provide a list of remote end users located in Belarus, China, Cuba, Iran, Macau, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela, or whose ultimate parent company is headquartered in Belarus, China, Cuba, Iran, Macau, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela. Based on the records and information provided as part of the application process, BIS and reviewing agencies will determine on a case-by-case basis whether to approve or deny the license of these specific commodities. Now, the rule seems to hang its hat on these provisions, but reading it myself, I already find places that deserve criticism, or in my opinion warrant an outright deletion of the entire policy. First, let's look at the U.S. customer and 50% total product provision. According to an article written by the Center for a New American Security, CNAS, they actually broke down the numbers for what this provision actually means. They used 2025 as a base example. In 2025, cumulative purchases of H200s are estimated at a total of 2 million chips. That means assuming 85% of those 2 million were sold to U.S. customers, under this new 50% framework, China could purchase up to 850,000 H200 chips under this threshold. To put this level of computing power into perspective, it's roughly twice what Chinese fabs are expected to produce domestically in 2026, according to CNAS, as well as twice the capacity of the world's largest data center and nearly OpenAI's entire deployed compute worldwide at the end of 2025. I don't care how big of an income we'd receive thanks to financial finagling we've done to get 25% of the profits. Providing double of Chinese compute power on top of what they are already capable of manufacturing on their own seems like a terrible idea. Next, I want to talk about the provision that states the applicant must verify that the transaction is not prohibited by end user end use controls and controls for non-military end uses and end users. If you've listened to any of my previous talks on China, you'll know that this type of verification is functionally impossible when it comes to China. Their policy of military-civil fusion renders any type of end-user statement or know-your-customer guidance meaningless. Companies in China will always operate at the behest of the CCP. There can be no meaningful distinction made between their private enterprises and their government and military end users when it comes to this kind of technology. CNAS even mentions how Chinese law requires commercial firms to assist military and national security organizations. And does anybody think that that won't be taken advantage of when it comes to semiconductors and advanced chips? Chris McGuire from the Council on Foreign Relations put it this way in his article titled, "The New AI Chip Export Policy to China, Strategically Incoherent and Unenforceable." Quote, "The rule inadvertently demonstrates that there is no version of an AI chip export policy to China that is simultaneously permissive, implementable, enforceable, and protective of U.S. national security. While the restrictions included in the rule are preferable to unconditional exports, they are still severely problematic, creating a false sense of security while authorizing very large numbers of AI chip exports to China without enforceable guardrails that prevent their misuse. This will allow China's AI industry to close the gap with the United States and build the largest data centers in the world, and will not stop China's military or intelligence services from using these chips." End quote. These new regulations allow the export of AI chips that are 13 times more powerful than what was previously permitted. We have no way of keeping that processing power outside of CCP hands. Why do we insist on giving China such a huge leg up in the AI arms race? And as long as we're criticizing some of these decisions, we have also lost an additional protective rule by suspending the affiliates rule I mentioned in the last episode and earlier this episode. This is just another example of how end-user verification when it comes to China is a failing exercise. As an aside, on the provision to require third-party testing in the US to ensure the capabilities of the chips do not exceed the allowed parameters, I've heard two separate reasonings for its inclusion. First, that it's included in order to allow the US to earn that 25% of sales number, which normally would not be legal as export taxes are prohibited by the Constitution. That seems plausible, but the more amusing rumor I heard was that the real reason for this provision was so that we could include spyware or other sabotaged elements in the chips so that we can gain advantage over China. While I do think that's funny, I doubt it's actually the case. And even if it was, I'm not sure it outweighs the overall national security concerns of providing these chips to China. And those national security concerns are something that the rule continues to claim is a priority. Under its revision sections, the rule mentions that the revisions are, quote, intended to protect U.S. national security interests while allowing for a discretionary case-by-case licensing policy. These additional concerns will provide additional transparency on the commodities being exported and are intended to ensure that the advanced computing capabilities of the destination country do not exceed the capabilities or supply capacity of the United States or negatively impact the global foundry capacity that would otherwise be used to produce similar node or more advanced integrated circuits in a way that would be detrimental to U.S. national security interests, end quote. So it seems the primary security concern of the United States is the level of supply concerning these chips and if the overall supply will change the difference in computing power between nations. But I agree with several other commentators that one of the most pressing concerns is allowing China access to this high level of technology in the first place. As I've said previously, China cannot be viewed as simply a customer base. It is a geopolitical adversary, one that yes, we trade with extensively, but not one that we can trust to play fair or one day move against us. The new rule goes into further details on the capabilities of the chips that are now allowed to be sold and some of the revisions to regulations that allow the transaction. So if you're interested, or more importantly, in the industry, I advise you to read it for yourself. In the meantime, I'd like to pivot to a different semiconductor news that I think on the surface is more positive, but could potentially have international implications. On January 15th, the US and Taiwan signed a trade deal that will potentially drive a massive reshoring of America's semiconductor sector. It includes direct investments totaling at least $250 billion to build and expand advanced semiconductor, energy, and artificial intelligence production and innovation capacity in the United States. It also includes credit guarantees of at least $250 billion to facilitate additional investment by Taiwanese enterprises, supporting the establishment and expansion of the full semiconductor supply chain and ecosystem in the United States. In return, reciprocal U.S. tariff rates will not go beyond 15% along with other benefits. While this is good news for manufacturing, especially in Arizona, where I believe most of these investments will be applied to the TSMC facility there, it did give me pause. In the last episode, I speculated on a potential future where China invades Taiwan in order to secure a superior source of compute manufacturing and advanced chips. With this current effort to maximize our efforts to reshore semiconductor manufacturing from Taiwan into the US, is this just another sign that we believe an invasion from China is coming in the next several years? And that we'd like to get as much out of Taiwan as we can because we don't have an interest in defending them militarily should it come to that? As usual, I'd like to state for the record that I am no geopolitical expert. I'm not a diplomat, and I'm certain there are aspects of these trade deals that take place with knowledge beyond anything I could know or understand in some cases. But from the ground floor where I am, I do not like the look of this deal with China. It reads to me as another dangerous concession, where we prioritize profit and more abstract methods of market and geopolitical control over the direct securing of high-level technology. But that's just my view from here. I hope I'm wrong. Remember, for all your questions and export compliance needs, contact us here at Aero Export Consultants. Research done right, compliance made simple. I'm John Young, and this has been The Point.